Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, but on this occasion it's a review with a bit of a difference. Burson Audio has been kind enough to send me a pre-production model of their new Conductor 3GT DAC and amp all-in-one combo, and so this review is all about talking about the differences between the 3GT and the previous released 3XGT, and so when I say this review is a bit different, I'm not going to be going into depth about the features and benefits and functions and whatnot of the Conductor GT models, so much as the differences between these two. I'll of course give you a quick rundown of the key features in just a moment, like the key specifications, but keep in mind that if you want a full rundown of what these devices are all about, that's probably best found in the 3XGT review. Having said that, I'll try to give you enough information in this video so that you don't have to go and watch the 3XGT video first for this one to make sense. And with that in mind, let me give you a quick picture of what we've got here. These two units are very similar in that they're both top-end DAC amp all-in-one combos. They both retail for $2,999 US, and they'll both output 8 watts into a 32 ohm load. Where things get different though, is that the 3XGT down the bottom is a fully balanced design, and the 3GT on the top, so notice the X has been removed, so X referring to XLR for balanced, the 3GT on the top here is a pure single-ended design. Now you might look at this and say, but there's a single-ended output on the front of the 3XGT and there's RCAs out on the back, so what's the point in having a pure single-ended version? And I'll get to that shortly. But before I do, let me give you a quick rundown of the specifications and the common features of both of these. Both DACs use a pair of ESS 9038 DAC chips, and they're paired up with fully discrete output stages using Burson's own V6 Vivid op amps, and they're fully discrete op amps for those not familiar. Both units have active cooling, so there's a fan in the top of the device which helps with the airflow, and I know some of you aren't a huge fan of that design. I personally have no issue with it, and I've covered off in detail, particularly in the Soloist GT review, just how loud that sound is and whether I think it makes an impact on enjoying the devices. The short answer is I don't think it's a problem, but I know some of you aren't a fan, and that's completely okay. And I just realised I made an accidental pun saying that you weren't a fan of the fan. Not intentional, sorry about that one. Both of these devices will handle DSD 512 and PCM 768 kHz, so in other words, very high sample rates. They'll accept that through the USB-C sockets on the back, but if you're using coaxial or optical, it is limited to 192 kHz and 24-bit if that's an issue for you. Finally, talking about power outputs, I've already mentioned that both of these output 8 watts into 32 ohms, but this is where things start to differ a little bit. The 8 watt figure into 32 ohms is via the XLR output on the 3XGT, and of course there's only a 6.3mm on the 3GT, and so this is going to give you 8 watts into single-ended, whereas if you plug in single-ended to the 3XGT, in other words if you're plugging into the 6.3mm socket here, that's only going to give you 4 watts into 32 ohms. So there is the ability to have more power going into a single-ended headphone from the 3GT, but having said that, 4 watts into 32 ohms, in other words what you can get from the single-ended output of the 3XGT, is still plenty. So realistically this is not about getting more power into single-ended, so much as some other changes to the circuitry. You see, the moment you create a circuit that's designed for driving headphones in a balanced format, in other words where you've got separate positive and negative for left and for right, the moment you do that, you're having to put extra components into the signal path, because essentially you're having to take the signal and split it into all those extra positive and negatives instead of the shared common ground that's used in single-ended. What that means is a more complex signal path, and then theoretically the more components you have in that signal path, the more chance there is of degrading the sound slightly. And so what we have going on here in the 3GT is a simpler, more direct signal path, which theoretically should result in better small signal accuracy, which is generally important for things like spatial information in the music and potentially also tonal and timbral information in the music. And in addition, it means that the transistors used in the single-ended signal path are also more powerful transistors. And my understanding of that is that I think because there's going to be less of them, you don't have power going to the positive and to the negative. You've just got the power going through the positive and then a return path through the ground. And so it's a different signal path. It's going to bring a different flavor of sound to it. But my big question coming into this was whether or not it was better, whether it was worse, whether it was just different. And so that's what I'm hoping to be able to answer for you today. And so as I said, I'm not going to go into any further details about the design and the features and the functionality. All of that's covered in the 3XGT review. If you want to know things like which filters are available, what the menu system contains, check out the 3XGT review for that one, because everything else in terms of the menu and the features is identical between both. It's purely the output signal path that differs between the two of these. What I will do though is give you a really super quick tour of the unit just to show you that we've still got the same sorts of outputs on the front, but instead of having a 3.5, 6.3 and XLR output, we've now got a 3.5 and two 6.3s. The display and the menu buttons and the volume control wheel, all of that is completely unchanged, it's all identical. And then if we flip around to the back of the device, you'll see here that instead of the combination of XLR and RCA outputs on the 3XGT, now we've just got all single-ended outputs from the 3GT. And so you might immediately look at this and go, well, you're getting less value for money here, but it may not be the case if it sounds better. And that's a big if, so let's now talk about sound quality. I often get asked for recommendations on the channel for specific products at specific price points. And so what I've done to help is produce this database. If you take a look at the description box in any of my videos, you'll find a section that says Passion for Sound Recommends. You might need to click the More button to see it, but it's always in the description. Clicking on the Passion for Sounds Recommends link will take you through to this database and give you a chance to see all of the different products that I've recommended over the years. The Airtable database contains a heap of information, but so that it's not overwhelming, I've set it up in such a way that you can filter it to look at just the sorts of products you're looking for. Let's say you're looking for a headphone, you can select that in the filter list and see all of the headphones that I recommend ordered by price from lowest to highest. You can also use the filter and sort buttons in different ways to better suit your searching needs, so feel free to play around with it as much as you like, it won't affect what other people can see. The idea was to make a resource for you that allows you to quickly and easily find the types of products at the budget that you're looking for. Once you've found products that you're interested in, you'll also notice that there's links next to each of the products that will take you to various retailers and manufacturers. So you might find links to places like Apos Audio in USA and Canada, or Amazon links to the USA, Australia, Canada and the UK, or global links to places like Massdrop, Linsol, Hi-Fi Go, or the manufacturers themselves such as Verum Audio, Jashelli Labs, and ZMF Headphones. Some of these links are affiliate links, but certainly not all of them, and it's definitely not a criteria to get on this list. These are just products that I recommend, and whilst your support via affiliate links is always appreciated, it's absolutely not expected, and also does not influence whether a product makes it onto this list. The list is always evolving, growing and changing, so do check back regularly if you're looking for something new, and I hope you find this a useful resource. For now though, let's get back to the review. The best way for me to test the sound quality of these was to try a couple of different headphones on each of these devices across a few different tracks. So I'm going to step through 3 different tracks and 3 very different tracks now, and tell you what I heard from each of these with different headphones. In all 3 cases, I was using my phone as a transport, using USB Audio Player Pro for a bit perfect output, and therefore going from USB-C out of the phone into the USB-C sockets on the back. The first track I tried was Snake Charmer by Rage Against the Machine, and I was listening with the Hi-Fi and Susvaras. From the balanced output of the 3XGT, the Susvaras on Snake Charmer sounded detailed, dynamic, there was a good sense of separation in the sound, it was a really nice listen. The soundstage is moderately wide from the 3XGT with the Susvaras, and the imaging is strong with the guitar to the right, the bass to the left, the drums slightly to the left and slightly back, and the vocals centered in the mix with a little bit of distance between you as the listener and the vocalist. When I moved over to the 3GT and therefore obviously a single-ended output, what I heard was that the soundstage got a little tiny bit more intimate, not drastically so, it didn't get congested or anything like that, but it definitely came in a little bit from left and the right direction, and probably the depth stayed about the same, but everything shifted slightly closer to me as a listener. And along with that, I'd say the tonality got a little bit richer or a little bit fuller. I'm not saying it got warm, all of the detail and the texture and the clarity was still there, but there was a tiny bit more sense of body or weight in the sound. Very, very subtle, but it was definitely there. And so the separation of all of those sounds I mentioned before, so the guitar, the bass, the drums, the vocals, everything was still beautifully separated, very well defined in space. But the overall sense of space was slightly reduced because of that little bit less sense of width and that slightly closer positioning of the soundstage. Again, I didn't feel like it got too close, it wasn't claustrophobic or congested or in my face. But in comparison between the two, the Soloist 3XGT is a tiny bit wider and just a tiny bit further away. Now, Snake Charmer is a track with a lot of stuff going on. It's quite a noisy recording, as most Rage Against the Machine stuff tends to be. And so I tried something a little bit more simple, a little bit more stripped back, and that was in the form of How Long Blues by Eric Clapton. Starting with the 3GT this time, and what I heard, still with the Susvaras, was Eric Clapton's voice from the 3GT was quite close to me as a listener again. Once again, not claustrophobic, not too close, but it was a more intimate presentation. What it also showed me though was I could hear very, very clearly the positioning of Eric Clapton from the microphone. It was wonderfully insightful as to what I could hear within the mix. And that again speaks to the fact that even though there's a bit more presence in the sound from the 3GT compared to the 3XGT, it's never thick, it's never rolling things off or smoothing things over, it just has slightly different presence and weight to the sound. Eric Clapton's guitar comes across crisp and clean from the 3GT, again evidence of the fact that it's not overly rich and warm, it's just a subtle kind of shift in character, I guess I'd say. And whilst there's again a fair bit happening in this mix, so even though I said it was more stripped back, what I mean by that is it's less of a noisy track compared to the Rage Against the Machine, there's still a lot of instrumentation going on in How Long Blues. And the 3GT does a great job once again of separating all of the sounds. The overall sense of space in the soundstage is again relatively intimate. It's not a huge spacious sounding device, but I never felt like it was lacking enough space to clearly separate all the sounds and never sound like anything was sitting on top of another sound. Moving over to the 3XGT, and it felt like a bit of a trade-off. And what I mean by that is that I got a bit more space, which I quite liked, but in doing so I also lost a little bit of focus of the image. In particular on this track, what I really noticed was that the 3GT does a better job of focusing the image in space. Now I know the term holographic is often frowned on, people don't like it when you're talking about audio, but the reality of it is the 3GT creates a more holographic image compared to the 3XGT. The 3XGT is still very good, but it loses just a little bit of that focus, a little bit of that clarity in terms of the positioning and the shape and the size of each sound when compared to the 3GT. But what you're getting in return is a better overall sense of space. I shouldn't say better, a larger overall sense of space. And so I feel like the 3XGT splits everything apart a little bit more, so it separates the sounds a bit more, it's got more space to separate them in, and it places a little tiny bit more emphasis on things like textures and details versus tonal richness and even maybe tonal accuracy compared to the 3GT. Now I should really stress at this point, these are not vastly different devices. What I'm talking about here are shifts within maybe the 3 to 5% range. And so you could easily have either of these and be incredibly happy with the results. It's not as though you're going from one sounding really rich and dark and the other one highly analytical. They're both generally pretty neutral, with one just bumping slightly towards that extra bit of weight and richness in the sound, or let's say presence, not richness, and the other being the 3XGT, leaning just a tiny little bit more towards separating the sounds and adding a bit of extra texture, or bringing out a bit more texture perhaps. But in both cases, they're excellent, excellent devices. And let me share with you one more track just to finalise the differences between the two. And that track is Almost by Jewel, and on this occasion I'd moved over to the Mezza Elite. From the 3XGT as my starting point, both the guitars and the vocals were beautifully defined and extremely textural. There was a lot of detail coming through in the mix. Moving over to the 3GT though, and on a very simple recording, it really allowed me to focus in on what it was doing well, and that is that the guitar and the vocals had a slightly fuller sound, a slightly more harmonic sound you could probably say, and each of the sounds was more tightly focused, very similar to what I said on the Eric Clapton track, and also both of them had a bit more presence. For me it was a case where I think the 3GT is giving you a more lifelike, realistic, kind of tangible experience, whereas the 3XGT is probably making it sound a little bit more like it's a recording. And I don't mean that as a knock. My point is that with the 3XGT, you can hear into the mix, you can pull apart the details and the textures a bit more. Whereas I feel like the 3GT is closer to what you would hear if you were in the room with the musicians. Neither is good or bad, both are very interesting, and both are very, very enjoyable. Before I give you a conclusion as to my preferences and which one I would want on my desk, The one other thing I should mention is that if you are looking to use these also as a DAC, keeping in mind that the DAC in the 3GT can only put out an RCA output, but if you were looking to use these as both an all-in-one and also feed a DAC output, then everything I've just said about the front outputs for the headphones does carry through when using them as a DAC with an external amplifier. And so just to be clear, the 3GT as a DAC only is going to produce that slightly more intimate sound, that slightly more focused and present sound, and therefore give you that very lifelike kind of tangible experience. Whereas the XLR outputs from the back of the 3XGT are going to give you more of that detailed, textural, slightly split apart, slightly more separated sound. And the final thing I should point out along those same lines is that if you were to pick up the 3XGT and then run a single-ended output from the front or the back, you're going to get a little tiny bit closer to what I've described from the 3GT, but it's definitely not the same. If the presence and focus of the 3GT is here, and the separation and textual information of the 3XGT is here, then I would say the single-ended output from the 3XGT just brings you kind of here. So it doesn't go all the way towards what the 3GT does, but it does take a step in that direction. Something else that I want to point out for anyone that's looking to pick up maybe the 3GT and doesn't go and watch the 3XGT review is that when we looked at the back of the unit, you would have noticed that we've got a couple of inputs as well as the outputs. And that means that you can use this as an amp in addition to using it as an all-in-one. But what's worth knowing here is that the volume control for these units is controlled via the DAC chip. And that means whatever you run into these RCA inputs here, and the same is true for both the XLR and the RCA inputs on the 3XGT, any analog sources fed into here are actually going to be resampled by the DAC chip because that's the only way the volume control can be handled. What that means is you're not going to get a pure feed from whatever your external device is, be it vinyl, be it a different DAC, etc. It is going to get reprocessed by the internal DAC chip, but my experiences with the 3XGT are that it handles that really well and doesn't seem to degrade the sound very much, if at all. So check out the 3XGT review if you want more detail on that one. But just keep in mind you can use the RCA inputs, but it will get resampled along the way. And so with all that said, let me give you some final conclusions and tell you which of these I would actually want on my desk. And it's worth me mentioning that Burson have been kind enough to leave one of these with me on an extended loan. And up until now, it's of course been the 3XGT because the 3GT didn't exist. And so whilst I haven't spoken to Burson about this, if they're willing to leave one of these two with me on extended loan for future testing and comparisons, the big question for me was which one would I want it to be? Now from a comparisons point of view, the 3XGT makes more sense because it's got a balanced output, it's got the ability to run balanced and single-ended, but the reality is as I sat with it and I thought about it from a pure enjoyment point of view, the one that I most liked listening to, the one that was the most enjoyable and pleasurable to my ears through my headphones, and again that was mostly the Susvara and the Mesa Elite, but I've also run it with things like the ZMF headphones as well, the one that I enjoyed the most was actually the 3GT. Both are excellent and I would happily live with either of these devices as my only ever product. But if you said to me which one do I enjoy the most, which one do I want to listen to the most, it's definitely the 3GT, and that kind of surprised me. I love the 3XGT, I've been really enjoying it since I got it from Burson on loan, and yet the 3GT just brings a sense of tangibility and presence to the sound that really takes it to the next level for me. And as much as I'm a huge fan of soundstage size and space, I actually prefer the imaging focus of the 3GT, and I'm happy to trade off just a little bit of space for that image focus and that general sense of harmonic, what I'd call harmonic accuracy and richness and presence in the sound. Again, I can't stress enough, when I'm saying richness, I'm not talking about warmth or thickness of the sound. I'm talking about the fact that all of the harmonic content of the music sounds like it's there for me to hear. Whereas with the 3XGT, and only in contrast I'm talking about here, with the 3XGT, when you put the two side by side, I feel like some of that harmonic richness is lost behind the extra detail and clarity that the separation of the channel seems to provide. And so once again, this is wonderful evidence in my opinion that balanced is not better for the sake of it. Sometimes balanced is better because it can give us extra power. Sometimes balanced is better because certain headphones just seem to sound better that way, but sometimes a simpler, shorter signal path with a single-ended output is absolutely the way to go. And so if you're in the market for an all-in-one, do-it-all device, probably an endgame choice for someone that just wants a single device on your desk, and maybe you're not looking to go as far as something like a Hugo TT2, then I would absolutely recommend once again either of these products. I finished the 3XGT with a very strong recommendation, and I'm going to double down on that now by saying that both of these are highly recommended by me. They work really well, they sound fantastic, and they can drive any headphone you're likely to want to put to them. Admittedly, the volume range is a little bit limited if you're using IEMs, but in low gain you can still get some good range out of them. And so with that said, I'm going to highly recommend both of them again, but I will say that if you're someone that values that imaging focus, and that sense of presence and harmonic accuracy, then I do think it's worth considering the 3GT. Don't get sucked into the trap of thinking that balanced is automatically better, because in my opinion, this is proof that it's not the case. This is proof that balanced and single-ended are both excellent, and it's going to come down to your preferences, which you prefer. So if you're valuing that image focus and that little bit of extra presence in the sound, go with the 3GT. If you want the versatility of driving balanced and single-ended and maybe running it as a DAC to other amplifiers as well, then the 3XGT might be the better choice. Either way, you really can't go wrong, and whilst my preferences lean slightly towards the 3GT, if the 3GT didn't exist, I'd still be highly recommending the 3XGT, and indeed, for some people, this is still a better choice. So hopefully I've been able to provide you with some clarity and understanding of the differences between these two. If there's anything I've missed that you'd really like to know about these, then do pop it in the comments down below. But please do make sure you check out the 3XGT review before asking me general functionality questions, because I've probably covered it off in the 3XGT review. And so hopefully you've found this review useful and helpful. If you have, as always, I'd love it if you hit the like button, and consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell if you haven't already. I've got some fantastic content coming up very, very soon, including things like the Modhouse T60 Argons. I've got the new Topping DX7 Plus Pro and also the new Topping A90D amplifier. I've got a whole bunch of really great stuff coming. So hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell. But for now, happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.